Valiant, courageous, and a warrior without peer, but peace is his most fervent wish. Fortress Maximus fights only out of necessity and believes that all violence is ultimately pointless and counterproductive. Fort Max transforms into a battle station in city mode and controls two armored vehicles, Gaskin and Grommet, which, when combined together, form Cog. The head transforms into a semi-autonomous Cerebros, whose binary bonded to Nebulon leader Spike. Fortress Maximus comes with everything you see here, minus the Micromasters, and Cog, and any accessories. Even though I think this figure cut a lot of corners, I don't think toy reviewers give it enough credit. Everyone ever has the figure displayed when they're reviewing it, so the hands are just folded out like they're transforming it into robot mode. As a simple fix to this, you can literally just flip the hands under the ramps or under the arms. It's that simple. Of all the things that I have to complain about in this figure, I don't think that the base mode is one of them. As another cool feature of the figure, you're going to notice that there are pink flaps on each side of the arm. These little flaps can interact with other base modes to form little ramps. I mentioned before that Leader Class Blaster has a city mode that was actually a little bit better than Fort Max's base mode. And you know, my opinion's kind of changed on that. Fort Max's base mode is pretty cool, but Blaster's base mode is awesome too. It'd be a nice little addition to add a little communications network to Fort Max's already heavily armored fortress. As an added bonus, Fort Max does have a lot of 5mm ports all over the figure, and as a result, you can take War for Cybertron Siege Cog, who I'm doing a little mini review on, and you can split them apart and place them all across the entire thing. You're going to have to get more than one to really fill out the figure, but once you do, you're not going to be disappointed. Now that we've really taken some time to really explore out the base mode, we're going to transform this thing into its battle station mode. Let's get on the transformation and see what I think. I mean, it certainly is accurate, but nothing happened. I don't feel like there was really anything that went into this transformation. You literally just moved the legs in. Why? Why are you calling this a whole separate mode? They could have at least had a couple of extra guns or something deploy, but this just feels god-awfully cheap. But ultimately speaking, it's Generation 1 accurate, and I can't harp on it too much because this is the design it's based off of. There's really nothing to talk about. The cannons are cool, but if you look at the thing from any angle but this low dramatic angle, it looks horrible. Anyways, moving on to robot mode. Before I forget again, I just want to take a quick look at Cerebros. I'm not going to go over every individual point of articulation on the figure, but I am going to say that, weirdly enough, this is one of the best parts of Fort Max as a figure. I really love the look of Cerebros in Hasbro's release a lot more than Takara's release. I like the black and gray highlights. I love the articulation. I love the way this thing transforms. So now that I've really done a quick overview of Cerebros, we can get into the part we've all been waiting for, Fortress Maximus. Good God, is this thing ever an impressive figure? Or at least impressive looking, I should say. This figure is absolutely huge and has a lot of articulation, but the joints on this thing are not made for stop motion. I cannot emphasize enough, they are not made for stop motion. This review took way longer than it should have, because the ratchet joints on the thighs are extremely fragile, and if you put even the slightest amount of pressure on them, the whole thing collapses on itself and falls apart. I really wish they had tighter joints on this figure, but the posability is still excellent. I mean, what Titan class figure do you know that you can get to do a frickin' Iron Man? Articulation includes the head that can look both left and right, outward shoulder movement, beyond 90 degrees of bend at the bicep, individually articulated fingers, wrist rotation, bicep rotation, 360 degrees of shoulder rotation, waist rotation, then universal hip joints for forwards and backwards movement, and then 90 degrees of bend at the knee. Altogether, this figure has absolutely great articulation, but there's one thing that really bothers me about not just this figure, but every figure when it comes to articulation. Why does he not have ankle rockers or ankle tilt? On a figure this big that weighs this much, it's bad enough that the joints barely support themselves, but when you don't have ankle rockers, you cannot pose this thing without giving yourself a migraine. It's really upsetting to see, too, because this is such a great figure that, ultimately speaking, could have been so much better, but just cut so many corners. Altogether, Fortress Maximus isn't my favorite figure per se. He's far from my favorite figure, but he is a figure that I'm going to have a dear place in my heart with because it's my first Titans class figure, and it's the first big expensive thing that I've ever gotten for myself. So let's get into the pros and cons of owning Fortress Maximus. The pros of owning Fortress Maximus are that he is a heavy articulated figure. There is a lot of different points of articulation, and you can get a lot of different poses out of this figure. I find it to be really fun that you can go and have this guy doing an Iron Man pose, again, as a Titans class figure. Another advantage of owning this figure is that there are two different figures in one. There's Cerebros and there's Fortress Maximus. You could say Emissary or Spike, who he really is, could count as a figure, but yeah, he really doesn't. It's just a Titan Master. It doesn't really transform into anything except for the head of another figure. Another great advantage of this figure is the playability it has in its base mode. Fortunately, one of the few corners that Hasbro didn't cut was making it compatible with other base modes. I thought that was really innovative, and considering this thing doesn't have anything like the original, like working elevators or compartments to store things in, I'm glad that they actually at least stepped in and added that amount of playability to the figure. The cons of owning Fortress Maximus include the fact that the alt mode, the battle station, is really not that strong of a mode. It looks like the figure is just laying down, and it's so easy to tell. They didn't really do anything to conceal the fact it's just a guy laying on its stomach. Another con of owning Fortress Maximus are that his joints are incredibly weak. His thighs in particular have given me multiple problems with this animation, and that's why it took so long. Normally, I run my animations at 30 frames a second, but I had to bring this down all the way down to 10 frames a second, and it still looks choppy when I show off the articulation on the figure. Another disadvantage is the fact that they did take quite a bit of the innovation out of the G1 Fortress Maximus. That thing had working elevators, that thing had compartments and other storage areas. This really doesn't have anything for the figures to hide inside of. It does work kind of well with Siege Micromasters, but again, it wasn't made for them. Another con of owning the figure is definitely the fact that if you order this thing on quick shipping or whatever, it's going to come to you damaged. When I got my Fortress Maximus, it looked like it had gotten punted like a football. The leg I thought was totally broken, but I fixed it. The package had a giant hole in it, and there were a couple of other QC issues that I encountered at the beginning of owning the figure too. So what figure am I going to review next? Well, I ordered Omega Supreme at Big Bad Toy Store and spent an extra $55 on 2-day shipping because I'm a lunatic. You know, maybe I should be a little bit more patient with my figures getting here. After all, it's not like YouTube's going to do anything completely stupid to ruin the platform for anyone or anything like that, right? Right?